Jamie Decker from Experience Anatomy. Welcome to the Anatomy and Clay Learning System podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Great to be here chatting with you.
Great to have you on and learn more about this, your amazing organization. I kind of just stumbled across an article and just found myself absolutely I lit up thinking about all the things that you do there. And there were some parallels with how Anatomy and Clay likes to approach instruction. We've done side-by-side workshops with hands-on construction of anatomy, along with having a cadaver in the same room and going back and forth. But so I was really fascinated by what you've put together. Let's start with just a little bit about your background and
Yeah,
how did you choose you were gonna live
it's
with?
definitely it's not a straight path, and I think
Uh-huh.
like probably a lot of other entrepreneurs or business owners, it didn't come overnight, right? I grew up in a fairly traditional household. However, my parents, I would say, were a little more holistic. Nowadays, that's fairly normal, and probably out in Colorado, it's more normal than in the Southeast in the 80s and 90s. So like my mom had a natural birth. She was a stay-at-home mom. We homeschooled. For a little while, we did public school and I was in year-round school, but I think having that sort of upbringing gave me not only appreciation for like the natural world, but also gave me a lot of freedom as a child and in my youth to explore things that I was interested in that I may not have been exposed to in a more traditional education setting. And I was the youngest of three kids, so I was also traditionally exposed to higher level learning because,
Hmm.
as a mom, I'm a mom of my own three kids and have done some homeschooling. It's a lot easier to keep them on the same curriculum than try to customize for everybody, right? So the younger ones just have to kind of keep up with the bunch.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, so my dad was an entrepreneur, owned his own business. He was a body shop guy, so we were always at the shop with my dad, taking apart cars, taking apart bicycles. He was a home builder. He now currently still flips houses, and I've been fortunate enough to get to work with my dad as a youth and on the business side of things, and have always kind of had an entrepreneurial spirit. I think having again that sort of non-traditional upbringing, but I always had a keen interest in medicine and in my own body, and was not unusual for me to be dissecting animals at the kitchen table. My older brother and sister opted to go to traditional high school, and I was the only one who decided to stay homeschooling. So they would come home from high school with their friends and say, "Oh, your younger sister's so weird. She's dissecting a shark at the table." And I was always like, whatever, I think it's fascinating. So I always kind of had that keen interest, even as a very young child. So once I graduated pretty early at the age of 15 and started working immediately. So I was working full time and working in the service industry and really thought that I was going to be a chef. I loved cooking and, back of the house kitchen work and working with tools, which is very similar to a cadaver lab, believe it or not. And I learned a lot through that experience. And eventually, I think it was the book Stiff that I read.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Mary
Mary
Roach.
Roach. Yeah, I've had a little bit
Yeah.
of correspondence with her too. She's a
Oh,
fascinating
well,
person.
yeah.
Yeah, she's very
Yeah.
cool. That book, coupled with an experience my older brother had actually, which is really funny. Just a side note, he now works for me at Experience Anatomy. A little bit of a family biz, but
That's
he's
great.
doing construction, specifically a special trade called medical gas, which is brazing or a type of welding for oxygen nitrogen lines in hospitals and dental clinics and veterinary clinics. And he was working, I won't say the school university name because taking pictures in the lab is prohibited, so I don't want to get him in trouble, but he was working at a
Sure.
medical university and happened to stumble upon their anatomy lab. And he took a picture of it and he said, "You would love this. They are dissecting, there's human bodies, they've got these specimen." And I was about 16 at the time. And he was older than me, so he's working. And I'm like, I gotta figure out how to do this. I had also just recently seen the Body Worlds exhibit. It
Sure.
came through our town. And so all these kind of things at the same time were culminating where I'm going, okay, there's these anatomy labs, there's people being able to see inside a human body. I have just seen inside of it for the first time with this crazy, plastination technique. And I'm like, how do I get into this? And so that's kind of what sparked the whole thing is,
Wow.
how does anybody do this? And I had no interest in going to medical school, right? And so that was really the question, is how do I do this without going to med school? Because I don't want to be a doctor. I was really never interested in a clinical setting or working with patients. And so, I think that's key, because for our youth today who are interested in healthcare careers, most often it's doctor or nurse.
Right, right.
They don't know that
Yeah,
there's another option, right?
right. Yeah, and and even that's such an interesting point just by itself right there, because you're absolutely right. You think if you study a human anatomy, you're thinking doctor or nurse or working in a
Mhm.
hospital or something like that. But even just having just for its own sake,
Yes,
learning anatomy is so valuable. And
yes,
there are many, many other applications and reasons why you'd want to experience anatomy.
absolutely. Exactly. There it is.
Yeah,
There's a
there it
name.
is.
I love
Yeah,
to hear
yeah,
that. That's
yeah.
exactly right. So I went on a kind of a crazy journey from there of deciding, well, I'm going to go to a plastination conference. There was a plastination conference coming up in Toledo, Ohio, and I didn't know what to expect, and I had never done plastination. But I thought, well, let me go to a conference and see. And again, I was, this is a couple years later, actually, when I've been researching this and trying to figure out what to do. I had enrolled myself in funeral school for college, thinking, okay, well, that's a first step where I can learn preservation, and, let me go experience it in a way and see if I can handle it, right?
Right.
Because as interesting as it is, people don't know how they're going to react when they experience death in front of them or a dead body, And
Sure.
so I had shadowed in a couple funeral homes and thought, okay, I maybe felt a little weird. And again, it wasn't quite right for me. I didn't really want to work in a funeral home, but it was the closest kind of thing I could figure out that was not a 4-year degree, that wouldn't take up too much of my time, but I could kind of explore and get some experience. And so I was in funeral school when I saw this plastination conference in Toledo. And as a young student, I wrote letters to funeral homes saying, hey, will you sponsor me to go to this conference? Because, I'm a poor college student, and I had to take a big trip to Ohio, and the conference cost money. And I wrote to the conference and said, will you let me come as a student for free? And they said, you know what, if you can make it here, sure, we'll let you in the conference.
Wow.
And so I
Wow.
was like, I need, about $500 to get there and get a hotel and make my way there. Nobody gave me a dollar.
Hmm.
And, so I went actually to my brother and I said, oh, I really want to go to this conference. And I was so excited. And he said, why didn't you just ask me? Here's the money to go. And so I hopped in my car and drove there, and he gave me some cash to go. And lo and behold, Dr. Gunther von Hagens was there. It was like 60 participants at this whole from all around the world, like super niche conference, right? And I stuck out like a hair and a biscuit, like we say in the South. And I spoke to him and just, was wide eyed and said, I want to learn how to do this. I'm so excited. I want to know everything. And he's like, well, what kind of experience do you have? And I'm like, none. I'm in funeral school. I'm about to graduate. And he's like, well, that's something if you know how to embalm or the techniques, because that's the first step in plastination. And so I was offered a full scholarship to come to Germany and live in Body
Wow.
World's production facility. I'm the only American who's extensively trained. And while that sounds nice, I like to say I ruined it for everybody else, because after me, they're like, it's too much of a hassle with paperwork and visas and training to bring people over. So they typically hire within the EU. But that facility had just moved from Dalian, China to Germany for production. And so it was kind of new at the time. And so it was just that all the stars aligned, perfect timing, where I got to have this incredible experience of, I literally lived in the exhibit. I lived upstairs and I worked in the exhibit 8 to 10 hours a day, dissecting specifically for exhibits or for medical schools. And so I got what I would say is probably some of the best anatomy dissection experience I could have ever asked for, that I wouldn't have gotten any other way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even in
Sure.
medical school, you're dissecting a whole
Wow.
cadaver with 6 or 8 other people. You don't know what you're doing. You get one semester and that's it.
Yeah. Wow. So this is really just on the job in the one of the premier places
Yeah.
to learn. Did you have a comfortable working knowledge with the vocabulary and all the terminology and everything at that point, or
I'm
did it
glad,
matter?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mean, medical terminology is largely Latin or Greek origin, right? So there was um, knowing anatomical terms was super helpful because of the language barriers. A lot of people in this small town, it's a town called Guben, it's on the Polish border. Instead of English being a second language, Russian was more often the second language.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
it's like German, Russian, Polish. And I'm like, I came not prepared for that. But it was actually an interesting thing because they would have tours of visitors come through or special interest groups come through who spoke English. So all of a sudden I became the, oh, you know what's going on here and you speak English. So tour this through, which got me into teaching. And so here I found myself running tours, teaching people about plastination, doing exhibit run throughs, on the in between the dissections. I could only go back and forth so often because of the visa situation. And we were working on a more permanent role there when I got offered a job at Eastern Virginia Medical School in Virginia, which had their own plastination lab. And so at the age of 23, it was very hard for me to turn down a job at a medical university running the gross anatomy lab with my own plastination lab. And so
Wow.
it's like the experience in Germany was phenomenal. And I would have, jumped on being there for a lot longer time. I was young, my family's here. I don't know that I was quite ready to move to another country permanently. And that opportunity just like combined everything in one. And so I was fortunate to have that role where I was in charge of the donor program that was a state-run program of getting donors into the school, managing the donors, setting up programs and courses, working side by side, getting to sit in medical school lectures, and like kind of absorbing a medical school education without going to medical school.
Wow.
So once again, getting
Wow.
very informal training, but top-notch, exposure to stuff, which has
Yeah.
benefited me a lot in my career. And eventually came back here to Charlotte because my now husband got on the Charlotte Fire Department, which is a very long, tedious process and a career for him. And I don't know that at the time I realized it, but Charlotte's the largest city in the nation without a medical university.
Huh.
So
Huh. Interesting.
myself with a problem because
Yeah.
with really diving headfirst in this career that I was kind of a specialty thing, and there was nowhere for me to go. And so the next best thing was teaching. And only because of those experiences I had was I qualified to teach because I didn't have a higher level degree.
Right.
But when I would go
Right.
interview with schools and I told them my experience, they would all kind of look at each other and be like, "Ooh, you probably know more than we do."
Yeah.
Experiences were going to make an exception. And so I found myself teaching anatomy and physiology and medical terminology at a junior college in Charlotte, which again was a great experience of teaching medical terminology. I think everybody should take a medical terminology course, whether
Hmm.
a layman or a professional. I think all the youth should take medical terminology no matter what they want to go into. That's why I said when you said that earlier, I'm like, actually, medical
Yeah. Yeah.
terminology is huge.
Yep.
Uh, and that's really when it hit me when I'm like, here I am now teaching students anatomy from a textbook when I learned anatomy with my hands.
Right. Right. Right.
And that was probably the big spark. Body Worlds came back through Charlotte a second time, and the museum asked me to be a project specialist with them to run special groups through because they said the first time Body Worlds came through, we didn't really know much about it. And now that we're bringing it back a second time, we want to educate our. So I educated their entire
Mhm.
staff on the process, the ethics, where the bodies come from, how we do it, ran
Wow.
special tour groups through, and people said over and over, man, I wish this wasn't just here for 6 months. Man, I wish my next cohort of students could see this, but the exhibit's going to be gone next semester. And so it was all these kind of comments that I was hearing along with my experience of teaching with a textbook where I'm like, why can't we have this here? Why can't there be
Hmm.
a standalone lab that caters to all levels of learners, whether it's, a young student like me who just wanted to learn and wanted to find out more and was eager to have an experience, or these high level surgeons and physicians who I was running through my cadaver lab at the medical school who need continued education. And so I had seen the gamut of all these different student groups in all these different countries, really, and states and different laboratories. And so I thought, with Charlotte having this massive healthcare community, but no medical school, where are they doing this? They're having to
Yeah.
travel to get this training. So that was really the idea that sparked. And I know that was a very long answer to your
I
question.
it's great. I love it. It's what a great story about just taking a passion that sounds like it just kind of developed organically in your life and just turning that into a career.
Yeah,
It's amazing. Yeah.
I'm
Wow.
very fortunate. And like I said, having family members who didn't say, "You're doing what?"
Yeah.
Or, no, you can't hop on a plane and go to Germany to an unknown place with unknown people with an unknown job and live in a facility where there's bodies that are being cut up for exhibits. They were like, "When you want to do it, go do it. We'll support
Yeah.
you." So
Wow.
having that support system was really beneficial too.
Yeah. So when did Experience Anatomy open, and give us a picture, sort of how you grew it to what looks to me online today to be a very robust program.
Yeah, so we put together the business plan in 2016 and kind of founded the company then and said, okay, we have this idea, we got legs, we've got a business plan together that we think will work. Because whether it's for profit, nonprofit, whatever, business still has to make money to survive.
Sure.
And so we had to figure out, how does this work? How do we make this happen? And within a couple of years after that, we were purchasing a bunch of plastinates from Body Worlds directly. And, I worked out a deal with them where I said, hey, you guys know me, you know what I'm all about. Can I order some? Can I buy some? And I want to put them in systems-based kits because that's how most of the schools teach. Some of them teach regional, right? But for the most part, particularly junior colleges or when anatomy and physiology are put together, it's systems-based. So I said, what if we took all these plastinates, because you can get just a heart or just a liver or just an upper limb. What if I curate kits of them into systems and I create content around them? Because what I noticed too is when I would show people plastinates, they're like, wow, they're beautiful, but I don't know what this structure is. Or when you take it out from everything else, I have no context. I don't know which way to hold it, even teachers, right? And so I thought, well, what if we created some content that provided some relevance to this beautiful, amazing, real structure so that people can apply what they're learning? And so that's where our tagline came from, Experience Anatomy, where education meets application. It's like, it's
Yeah.
one thing to learn it, right? Or memorize it or understand it. It's another thing to apply it to what you're doing. And so
Right.
that was sort of the how we started, was let's get a bunch of plastinates and start talking to people and seeing what they need and seeing what they're doing and how can we help them kind of improve their programs. Because plastinates are very expensive. I don't know if are
Sure
familiar
they are.
with products, but
Yes.
I mean a whole body is probably upwards of $100,000 now,
Right.
and junior colleges don't have a budget for that.
Right.
So that's where my conundrum came in, where I'm like, well, I can't get, I'm not here to sell plastinates to these universities,
Right.
but I can help the universities teach better through the use of these plastinates. So our idea was, let's curate the kits and the content and let the schools rent them for the time they need it, because they're only doing cardiovascular system for 2 weeks out of their semester.
Right.
They're not going to purchase all these and let them sit for the other 50 weeks of the year. So what if they just pay a small fee to rent them for the time they need them, and then we take them to another school? And so that was the beginning of it. And what we continuously heard throughout that was like, it's great to learn anatomy, but there's all these other applications that need hands-on skills practice, which I had seen, at the medical school with the cadaver lab. And so it was always a part of our original plan, but a much bigger scope of what we're doing today. So we founded a foundation, a 501c3 for whole body donation. And so we started our whole body donation program, I think in 2018. So a couple of years after we had kind of gained some proof of
Yeah.
concept and done some work with people, and started accepting whole body donors. And so we acquired 2 different spaces. We have a 5,000 square foot facility that manages our whole
Wow.
body donation, and then another 5,000 square foot facility for bioskills training. And so they work hand in hand. So we have this very holistic approach to it, that we have a team that works with our families and our donors who want to donate, and then a separate team on the clinical side who's working with our end users of, what do you need to accomplish your training? What's your end goal? And we match them together. So we provide both the venue space and the resources for any level of learner to achieve whatever it is that they need human tissue for.
Yeah.
So whether it's, just a shoulder for shoulder replacement surgery, or it's a whole body for, a vascular access course, we can provide, what part, what body, what specifications, what location, what time period, what type of embalming, because there's all different things that go into training for all different types of end users.
Wow. So you're probably very well known now in Charlotte as the go-to place for any level of school. And you're kind of just, you've got, I assume, just dozens and dozens of partnerships and relationships across the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we actually, believe it or not, we do more outside of Charlotte than we do in Charlotte. And
Okay.
that's probably been the most surprising thing about the
Yeah.
journey.
Huh.
Our facility, while we use it pretty frequently, it is not nearly at capacity. And
Huh.
part of the reason is because, these groups who are training, they might do it once a year or,
Hmm.
a couple times a year. And so filling up your calendar in a local space is a lot more challenging than meeting people where they are because there's a need across the country for this. So we have a program. Yesterday, we had a program in Charlotte. We had a program in Western Carolina at a university. We had a program in Omaha, Nebraska,
Wow.
program in New
Wow.
York this week. So we're actually working with
Wow.
groups in Italy now. So we,
Whoa.
yeah, we do a lot in a lot of different states across the country, whether it's us providing them resources for training they're doing in their lab, or whether it's our team going and facilitating training for them.
Wow.
Hmm.
That is terrific.
Yeah.
I also noticed that you have a program that brings in students, I think starting in middle school. You've got a whole facility devoted to that kind of an experience as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? There's,
Yeah, absolutely. We refer to those typically as a field trip, and so
yeah.
a little bit different than a skills lab, right? So a lot of the skills labs, like I said, maybe we'll have a whole limb or a torso or whole body. We don't do that for the schools because we don't want to expose the kids to too much. However, we do keep a collection of pro sections, whether it's here's a healthy heart, here's an unhealthy heart, here's different hemispheres of the brain, here's a healthy liver, unhealthy liver. We have all kinds, just like you would see in a medical university. And like we used to do at the med school, we'd bring student groups through and say, hey, are you interested in this? And we'd let them hold a heart or hold a brain. And so we use our plastinated specimen from Body Worlds and our wet or prosected specimen for the school field trips. And it's usually about a half day. And we run them through both a wet lab and a dry lab experience where they can do
Wow.
activities and hands-on with the plastinates, and then rotate through a wet lab where they get hands-on with the pro sections. And we get great feedback from those. The students love it. We honestly have more requests than we can fulfill for that. And part of the
Wow.
reason is, unfortunately, the schools usually don't have a budget.
Yeah.
We try to do it for as little to nothing as we can for those
Yeah.
groups. We want to support the community, so it's kind of a loss leader for us. It's not really the thing we do to make money, right?
Hmm.
But you never know, those turns into, oh, I have a parent who's a doctor, or my mom's a medical device, and now the kid goes and so it's absolutely something that's ingrained in what we do, and we will do it regardless if we make a dollar on it or not, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not about making money on those experiences. It's about exposure for the community.
When you see those students, younger students come through, do you keep an eye out for somebody who might have been you back
Yeah,
when you were a youth and
yeah,
somebody who's just so drawn to it? Yeah.
absolutely. We've done
Yeah.
internships with students who've come through programs. Some of them, we have a program that's pretty unique to us, and has been featured in a lot of articles. I think that we've done recently is called Dissection Club. And the idea came from when I was at the medical university. They had a club for students who were particularly interested in anatomy where they could come and do special projects. And so we said, why does it only have to be medical school? Why can't a chiropractor or a physical therapist or an acupuncturist or a yoga instructor have this experience? And so it's a monthly open lab session with our anatomist and whatever tissue we have available. And so you never really know what you're going to get, and you get to work on all different tissue each time you come. And if you want to specialize in something or do a special project, if you want to come to one or you want to come every month, it's kind of like for those folks who are just say, hey, I want to do something specific, or I want to continue learning constantly, they can come at a very low threshold and participate with other multidisciplinary specialists. We have people come from other countries to come to Dissection Club.
Yeah. Wow.
It's just a way to give back to the community, and a way to also maximize the gift of donation when maybe tissue has gone through a surgical procedure. It can't be done again. However,
Hmm.
someone can still dissect and learn from that. And so,
Yeah.
like, because we work directly with our own body donors and our own families, we really want to maximize the gift that they've provided for education and learning across the board.
Yeah. So how big is your staff now? How big an operation do you run?
How big do you think it is? I'm curious, after hearing what we do, what would you guess?
I'm guessing you have about at least 20 people on staff.
Half that.
Wow.
Yes,
Wow.
we're about
That's a
11.
lot.
Yeah, 11 right
You're,
now. We're
yeah.
busy. We all wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
We are rapidly growing. We're hiring all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
particularly, I don't know how much you know about the world of preservation, but embalming traditionally is done with formaldehyde, which is a very toxic chemical. It's a big problem. And we typically don't use a lot of formaldehyde unless we do a long-term program for a university. And last fall, I had the opportunity to go to Amsterdam and visit a medical university there that's utilizing a mind-blowing embalming technique that is completely non-toxic. It's almost food grade and provides both longevity of tissue for anatomical
Wow.
dissection and quality of tissue that's soft and flexible for surgical training as well.
Wow.
I've acquired the exclusive license to distribute that chemical in North and South America.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so we are about to expand even more. We have our first batch of chemical in production right now. And so in the United States, we have to manufacture it here. So we're getting our first test run done, and we have several schools lined up to pilot the product in order to get rid of toxic chemicals in United States medical universities.
Wow. Is that something where you need state or local approval because of any kind of certification of the embalming process itself to be okay? Yeah.
No,
Oh,
no, and
yeah.
because it's not, I mean, it's almost food grade. Like you could almost drink it and it
Yeah.
would,
Wow.
And so
Wow.
the chemical itself is completely non-toxic. It's a little bit different of a method of preservation, how you do
Hmm.
the preservation, and um, it's I think it's really going to change the landscape for medical universities and for
Yeah.
surgical training. So that's one of the things we're really excited about, and where we see we're probably going to need a lot more staff in the near future as
Yeah.
we're bringing that. It's kind of the third leg of our stool. You know, we've got our donor program, we've got our bioskills labs, and now we've got a better preservation technique that makes the whole thing kind of work
Wow.
better, not only for our
Wow.
donor families, but also for those end users.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you what do you think of the current state of anatomy education in like just across the country in general? And talk a little bit about why it's so important, like you said, even at a young age, to learn the terminology to kind of just at least begin to understand who we are as animals, as creatures on this planet who have so much going on all the time that we just kind of take for granted about our ability to wake up in the morning and move through the day. And it's only when we really encounter an issue that we tend to stop and say, oh, what's going on with my heart or my lungs or my stomach or my sore elbow even, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, it's a whole that's a big question, because that's getting into healthcare and education, and a little bit of philosophical stuff as well, because I think anatomy is foundational not only to all medical careers but to life in general, right? And it's unfortunate that anatomy education, again, I have young kids, so I think about how, it's a big thing, like, oh, schools are cutting out art and music or things like that. I feel like anatomy is kind of has gone through a similar problem, where particularly over COVID, it's like, well, let's just teach it online. And I'm like, it doesn't
Yeah.
work, and
Yeah.
even the research shows it doesn't work. And while there's some amazing tools out there that are absolutely fantastic supplementary or learning tools, it's not a replacement for true hands-on learning. And I will always be a stickler for, hands-on learning, not just because of experience anatomy, but I've experienced it myself. I'm a true poster child of the benefits of the hands-on learning with authentic human tissue. Um, I think there's not enough classically trained anatomists. You see a lot of master's programs popping up now for human anatomy, and oftentimes I wonder, well, what are these students graduating and then going off to do? Where are they working? Because so many of the medical schools that we work with, the person running their lab doesn't have any experience doing it.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a
Yeah.
degree in zoology or cell biology, and they say, well, you can run the anatomy lab. And I think we need to take a step back and train folks in the care of cadavers, train folks in, educate people on the benefits of whole body donation, and encourage more teaching and training through the gross anatomy lab, whether at university or third party environment, and reduce the stigma across the board. Like,
Yeah.
we're a death denying community. We're so, reactive in medicine and not proactive. And I think it all goes hand in hand. But I think the paradigm is shifting. We're seeing a lot more people going, maybe I should pay attention to what I eat. Or, there's a lot of toxins in our environment and our food. And particularly, I mean, you experience it probably a lot more in Colorado, right? It's
Yeah,
that
there's
my assumption would be, at least.
yeah, that sort of I think that that's true to a certain extent, but we have, there are layers like every state, and there's certainly is the idea of sort of a newer age community that's got
Mhm.
that awareness going on, and a lot of definitely strong environmental and ecological kind of approaches to life, and
Yeah.
a very strong pro-green
Mhm.
community, but it's also some old school ranchers and just long-term manifest destiny. This is our world.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know how to.
No,
So
I
yeah,
agree.
it's a,
I think it
yeah,
applies to education too. Like you see
yeah,
that
yeah.
shift in education, and we offer open houses to the public too, and we hear all the time people are like, I'm thinking differently about my body,
Hmm.
or I walked in here one person and I'm leaving another person. And so we really encourage that, just like, be a lifelong learner. You know,
Yeah,
anatomy is a great thing to go learn. I'm going to always promote that, but just being a lifelong learner in general is not a bad idea. And reducing the stigma around death and anatomy, and that it's like, it's not gross, it can be a really enjoyable experience, it can be a really holistic experience, it's something that anybody can do. It's, even as a donor, just about anybody can donate, and that's important too, to see the variety in our bodies, because once you've seen one, you've seen one. And so encouraging people to just keep learning, whether you're in a medical career or not, that, I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the state of anatomy changes across the board,
yeah,
particularly in medical schools, of course, because that's where you're primarily seeing it. But
yeah. I love the quote in the article, or something to the effect of, when you spend time around dissecting a cadaver, and then I think you mentioned something about going for a run, or, just that whole idea of how much you appreciate being alive. And, I have to say my time around anatomy and clay has made me much more aware of just understanding how my body moves through the world,
yeah.
and appreciate the fact that it is able to move me through the world
Mhm.
and get me places. And it's a remarkable, really, it's a remarkable thing that we're here, and there's so many of us, and we take so much for granted about our ability to do certain things, and even coming off watching the Olympics, and appreciating all
That's
these different specialized ways in which the body can actually perform some amazing things. And some 20 plus world records were broken this year in the Olympics, and you think, we're continuing to improve, and maybe it's specialized, but it shows the adaptability of the body too. So
absolutely the brain in
yeah.
general. I think about that. Oh my gosh, every day when I'm more on the business side of the company now. I'm not so much in programs anymore. Lately, I have been, because we've been so busy. So I like to get to jump in on them here and there. But we'll be building. We have a custom built inventory software system that helps us manage our cadavers that are coming in, and parts, and what programs they've been used for, and the medical and social history of our donors. And we're constantly improving that program. And there's so often that I think, man, the amount of time that I'm sitting here trying to get this computer to do what my brain does in an instant,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I need it to do that on a continual basis in the software. And like, these computers we're trying to make them do what our brains do really well already.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that incrediable? That's a
Yeah.
great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, I have a couple quick questions. Just one is, boy, do you stop and think about, yourself as a young um, learner with your shark on the kitchen table dissecting it, and think about how far you've come, and how do you, that's amazing. It must be a great
Yeah,
feeling.
I probably don't do that enough, honestly. I'm a bit of a workaholic. And again, I know I've said it several times, but my kids are getting like school age now. I have a 4-year-old, 6-year-old, and 8-year-old, and they're really curious about what I do. My 4-year-old actually just the other day said, "Mom, I have it on video. I can't believe I got it on video." She said, "Mom, I want to see inside the body, like all the body parts." And I said, "You do?" And because she's been in our office, but she hasn't seen a whole body on a table. And I said, "You do?" And she goes, "Yeah." So, and I said, "Well, how do you want to do that?" And she goes, "Well, we just go out and kill them, right?" And I said, "Oh," I said,
Mm.
"No, we don't kill them." And I just thought, "Oh my gosh." She has no context. And I thought, that's an amazing thing to realize, that she hears me talk about death and dying. And she's like, "Oh, I guess she goes and kills them. That's how she gets them." So we had this whole conversation around it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and it's amazing because it didn't even cross her mind that that's taboo or that would be bad, or she's 4.
right,
She just thinks,
right,
how
right,
else, why else would you? She doesn't know the concept of donation or education, really. And so
right.
it's really exciting to see that how important it is, even that young of an age of 4, to talk about it and how people die and what happens. And so it's really this, have this real reverence for death, and that it's such an appreciation for the donors and families that allow us to care for their loved ones, because man, it makes me teary
Mhm.
eyed. Like, not a lot of people get that experience.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
had I not been fortunate enough to be put in some positions to have these opportunities, I wouldn't be able to share it with all these other people. So yeah, I definitely sit back and think this is wild that we have hundreds of donors every year. We work with massive companies and
wow.
$1 million contracts and young students, and just the wide variety of people that we get to impact is incredible. I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's not something that I stop often to think about, because I'm so busy the next thing
Yeah,
and the next thing. But it's important to sit back and go, wow, yeah, at one point I was sitting at the kitchen table doing this. I would have had no idea where I would be, in my mid 30s with a family of my own, supporting them through this mission.
yeah, wow. And the final question is just, can you let folks know if they want to find out more about Experience Anatomy, and uh, let them know how to find out more and contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website's easy. It's just experienceanatomy.com. We're on all the major social media platforms as well. We put out a lot of educational content on Instagram, TikTok, and info at Experience Anatomy will come to one of our key players. Again, there's only 10 or 11 of us, so we work
Yeah,
closely hand in hand. But yeah, it's not just Charlotte. We go all over the place. We send people all over the place. So we'd love to support people in whatever, level of learning they're trying to achieve.
great. And I can extend an invitation here to you if you're ever in Denver or anywhere, really. We're in 10,000 classrooms around the country. If you want to have a special, demonstration or
Yeah,
opportunity to explore more, I know our founder would love to chat with you, and but just let's just be friends going down the road as two separate nonprofit organizations
yeah,
working on this whole issue. So it's such a pleasure to chat with you today, Jamie Decker, from Experience Anatomy. Thank you so much, and we hope to do this again. Yeah,
yeah.
maybe.
You. I have to tell you, if I was at our other location, I have an anatomy and clay model out on
Ah,
display next to my plastinates that I
ah,
personally did. And people ask me all the time, "What is that?" So I
that's
get to
great.
tell them it's anatomy and clay.
That's great. Well, thank you, Jamie. You take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you so much.